Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Well, Dan, good afternoon to you, I guess. Good morning to me. It's too late for me to be awake, and yet it's not early enough for me to be up. But I'm super excited to have this opportunity to sit down here and discuss a ton of great stuff. I can only suppose. With you. So welcome to the show. For people who don't know you, why is that me? Is that you? Who's beeping, Dan? Are we ready to go? Welcome
We are
to
ready.
the GenPool Spotlight. So for people who don't know, I guess we're really looking forward to the first Eden on EOS election proper coming up this weekend. You've done a lot of things in your life, way back in the day, from being, the first person, I guess, really to misunderstand Satoshi, from his words, and you did some great things with Block One. You resigned and you released your book, More Equal Animals. And I guess from an outsider perspective, this first election must be kind of the culmination of all of those thoughts. So you must be like super excited about seeing, that transformation and what's about to happen this coming weekend with the election.
It's been super exciting to see all the enthusiasm people have for the ideas from my book, More Equal Animals. The idea of how do we create a democracy that actually represents the people, that accurately measures the consensus and the opinions of the people without being taken over by incumbents, by media, by all the different political parties that are people colluding to take over the official consensus algorithm. And so it's been my passion for the past 15 plus years to come up with a better way to run society that's based on nonviolence, on voluntary consent. And that's why I got into cryptocurrency. That's why I created Bitshares to have a stable currency, because I figure, well, you need to have money if you're going to have any type of community at all. But at the end of the day, you need money and governance. Governance being sort of the ultimate consensus problem. How do we all agree on who owns what for everything? How do we agree who's right and who's wrong in a very subjective world? And how do we do so in a way that doesn't put us all under the thumb of a benevolent dictator who eventually gets replaced with a not so benevolent dictator? So that's the problem that I've been trying to solve. My book outlines all the problems with how modern democracies are really democracies in name only. We call them a democracy, but they don't represent the people, and the voting is corrupted. And even if the voting wasn't corrupted, the political party process is corrupted. And now with Eden on EOS, we're utilizing the principles of my book to bring the most decentralized governance process available to the EOS network with the purpose of making the EOS network independent, able to fund development that doesn't just get taken away by vote buying or other things. We've had 2 mock elections, and even though they were mock elections, the winners of those elections have gone on and done great things for the EOS community on a shoestring budget of donations that I provided for those mock elections. But now we've got the EOS Foundation supporting Eden on EOS with 200,000+ EOS given to the community. We're now almost 300 members strong in the Eden community, which is a lot of people when all of them are verified. They all appeared on video with 3 other members. So we know we have 300 real bona fide people that paid money to be a member and were willing to appear on camera and support the process. So it is super exciting to see this implemented on chain in a real event.
Yeah, I mean, I was a professor for a while, and did a lot of things in political studies and democracy, and it's interesting to me just to think about like where this came from, because we're in this situation where a lot of communities that are dabbling in the blockchain space are at this point where code is law. But when you look at what's happening with Eden, it's actually really interesting because it kind of brings it back a step, right? Like you can't just have a code as law scenario that doesn't factor in human emotion or, human want or need or places that, we need to be, we need to go, we need to think, we need to adapt, we need to change. So Eden does this, I think, really, really nicely. I kind of want to take a step back, though, before we dive too far into Eden, because I don't know the answer to this question. I'm not sure if you've ever answered it or not. But I want to know, way back, from how long was it that Animal Farm spoke to you? Like there was something in Animal Farm that got you, thinking, the cogs going, that made you realize that there's a better way, right? And you always said that Animal Farm was partially your inspiration for this book. And I'm just wondering, like, what it was that triggered that into this. Maybe you don't even have an answer for it. I was just always curious as a philosopher myself.
Well, the quote from Animal Farm is, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." And it's the idea that maybe you have a communist society, but some people are in positions of power and live like kings, even though everyone's supposed to be equal, right? Or maybe you have a democracy and we're all supposed to have one vote, but guess what? The people who control the media have far more influence. People who control Google and Facebook, far more influence. So the idea behind More Equal Animals was to reduce the gap in power between the individual and between individuals, so that the least powerful person and the most powerful person in any given group are less different. Might be another way of saying more equal, right? In terms of power, in a real and measurable sense. And that really comes down to the idea of independence, the relative power between parties, and making sure that if you join a community or you join a country, that you don't immediately surrender your power upon joining, that you have the ability to hold the community you're a part of accountable, and you maintain the ability to leave. If you don't maintain the ability to leave, then welcome to the club. You checked into the Hotel California. You can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave, which means the people who control the power structure that you checked into now control you, which means no person, rational person, would join a community that they give up their power to some power structure and have no way of holding that power structure accountable. And what we have with Dinos, democracy in name only, is the propaganda or the story that you are in control. But the reality is that it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. Or who gets to select who's even on the ballot. Or, if you in a two-party system, the political parties' internal governance structure determine the candidates, not the people. So it's just as important to discover who the candidates are as it is otherwise. And so what More Equal Animals proposes in the structure is kind of a fractal structure, a series of hierarchical delegated representations. And in doing so, instead of your vote being 1 in 300 million, it would be 1 in log base 5, 300 million. That dramatically reduces the number of, dramatically increases the amount of power you have, because you only have to talk to, like, maybe say all the United States. If you did maybe 70 people are the only people you would ever have to talk to or consider. There's no campaigning, there's no fundraising required in order to win. You don't need a large media presence in order to win. It's set up like a tournament, like whether it's basketball or chess or whatever. And each successive round, you identify the best, or the person who can reach consensus the best within their group. And this leverages wisdom of the crowds, and it's incredibly efficient. If you think of how much time people spend watching the news and trying to figure out who to vote for, and in spite of all that time, they're more misinformed than informed. People are rationally ignorant. And so even if they had all the information and could study all the information, they can't cast an accurate vote because it just doesn't make economic sense to gather the information necessary to cast an accurate vote. And your choices are so limited, you have false choices. So all these things make the current system untenable, but under the fractal democracy process, as I outline in my book, you get randomly assigned a group of 5 to 10 people. I think 5 makes more sense now. In my book, I use 10. But you randomly assign a group of 5 people, you talk to them for an hour or 2, and you pick a representative, and you're done. You have all the information you need right there in that group, talking to people, asking their views, assessing them, and you're coming to a 2/3 + 1 consensus, which means you can't form political parties. You have to reach a consensus or you don't get representation. All those things, make it really easy to participate. You're using localized information to make decisions, because you can't do things on a global basis. You can only evaluate the people in your group and say, of the people in my group, who is the best? And everyone is in different groups and they're all making the same judgment. And then that aggregates up until you get the best of the best of the best. And then at the very top, it's random, so that you basically have term limits and you're not guaranteed to win, which really ensures representation across time as well. There's a lot of factors, a lot of deep thinking that went into the book and the consensus algorithm in a way to assess the opinion of the people in a way that leverages the wisdom of the crowds and maximizes your influence. An example.
I mean, one could potentially say that, like, in America, every person has a vote, which in a sense is true. However, the structure of the voting system in America essentially cuts out a lot of the people that might want to, vote against the people who are in power. For example, if you're a convicted felon, and there's convicted felons that maybe shouldn't be convicted felons. Ross Albright might be one of them, for example, right? You don't get a vote, these things, right? And I live in a very different culture. I mean, I spent some time in America, but I live in Japan. And when I look at it from the Japanese lens, it's really interesting because the Japanese have one of the lowest voter turnouts in the world. And nobody goes and votes because they know that their vote doesn't mean anything. They know that it's not going to change anything. And what's hilarious to me, in a sad way, but it's still hilarious, is everybody knows that the government's corrupt. Everybody knows that the government's going to do corrupt things. And they just expect it. It's funny when somebody gets caught because the person goes on to national TV and he breaks down, and then they bring in somebody else. And it happens probably once out of every term. Whereas in America, we have this culture where everyone just keeps denying. And it just like snowballs into this, really poor effect of trying to convince people that you're going to do the right thing. And like you said, irrationally, sorry, I flipped it in my mind. But like you said, like irrationally logical is essentially the state that we're in. And where we can get now, I think what I like about your system and what I like about Eden, because I went through it a couple of times myself, is the fact that you're not really able to corrupt the system, but you are able to have this communal kind of push forward as the election progresses to be able to incorporate and adapt other people's ideas, right? So it's a very, interceptive of other people's ideas sort of system, where you're not necessarily beholden to a platform that you're just airing on national TV. You might have some feedback from somebody else in that allotted time that you're actually able to take and change and morph and incorporate other people's sensibilities and other people's ideas, which I think is just absolutely brilliant. And I think, you know, it's going to take the world a long time to figure this out. Like most of us who are in this space, who have been following you, we kind of get it. We get the power of blockchain. But what I love about it too is, like, you know, it's on the blockchain, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with anything. You could plug it into a DAO. I mean, we've thought about that in the project that I'm working on. We have the Uplift world. We have a bunch of different sectors that are making up different rules, and we could plug that even on EOS system into that, right? GenerEOS, for example, they could plug it into like where the funds are distributed. And I think there's just so much potential that, like you said, seeing this first election proper unfold is just going to be super interesting. And I'm excited to see, you know, who wins. And then who wins, because somebody wins, but then there's 4 people at the end, and it's kind of a toss up, and you know, everybody gets a little bit of money, I guess, to do with what they want. But I just think, yeah, like, well done, Dan. I think it's some really deep thinking, like you said, and I'm excited to see it play out, right?
Yeah, well, let me explain a little bit more about how it maximizes the power of the individual. On the cover of my book, I've got this little man right down here, and he's knocking over one domino, and it knocks over a bigger domino until you eventually topple an empire, right? With this structure, one person can convince their local group. The local group can then convince a bigger group, and so on and so forth. And when you have this fractal structure, you can maximize the power of one person to make change. Now, if instead you surrounded this empire building with hundreds of people, they couldn't topple the building, right? No matter how many people you surround, there's just not enough momentum to have any one person have that kind of change. All change is made on the margin. So it's a structure that mimics nature. And I sort of take I start with the premise that, hey, the one thing we can all agree on is the system is corrupt. The thing we can't agree on is how to fix it, because corrupt systems do everything they can to frustrate people's ability to reach a new consensus, right? And that usually takes the form of they control the media, and then the censorship, right? What is censorship except an attempt to prevent the people from reaching a alternative consensus that goes against the status quo, that goes against the current power structure? So people need to agree on like some very simple principle, because after that, everything is just law of the jungle, right? You know, in a certain sense, we're all just animals, and we gotta fight for resources on this planet. And if we cooperate, then we're stronger than if we don't cooperate, right? 2 people working together are stronger than 2 people in an uncoordinated fashion. So the question is, how do you coordinate people? And you need to collaborate with other people. But how do you collaborate with other people without giving up your sovereignty, without enslaving yourself to some local warlord, right? And then that's the challenge. So you need a very simple principle. Right now, there's a widely held principle that, hey, if it's a democracy, it's legitimate because divine right of kings, that's discredited. You know, religious-based systems discredited. You know, unless you consider modern politics as just another religion. But yeah, so we have this principle that, hey, consent of the governed is the key. And so now it's just, how do you measure this consent in an honest, verifiable way that cannot be gamed? And one of the benefits we have of blockchain is we get to see in real time how different governance structures on chain are circumvented off chain, right? There's a clear distinction between on chain and off chain. And so while on chain things might be theoretically fair, Off-chain people are colluded, they're doing backroom deals, and now they're manipulating the levers of the blockchain to get results on-chain that are not necessarily the intention of the on-chain voting system, right? And there's certain rules you just can't code on-chain because you know if you code it, it'll be circumvented off-chain. Well, we got the same thing in government. We've got the official consensus mechanism where we've got presidents being elected, and then we got the party system. The party system is the off-chain consensus algorithm, and it, at least in the United States, we instead of having 3 branches of government, which are supposed to be check and balance, executive, legislative, and judicial, we've got red and blue teams. They control people across all 3 branches, and they don't judge based on their independent assessment. They judge based upon the party's assessment. So the party reaches consensus. They tell the party members what to do, and that's why almost everything is a party line vote, whether it's in Congress or in Supreme Court. And so that means the real consensus algorithm is happening off-chain or in the parties, and circumventing all the checks and balances that we theoretically have, or that a lot of people want to believe that we have. And it's not just a matter of throwing out all the people and doing it. It's a fundamental structural problem with the United States government and most democracies around the world, is if you throw out all the corrupt people and you institute the exact same system, you're going to get the exact same corrupt outcome in the end, because it's adversely selecting for bad behavior, and the incentives are structured that produces that. That's why building a system of governance is difficult. It's not as simple as, let's just put it up to a vote. It's not as simple as, let's make it direct democracy, because direct democracy suffers from, hey, all the voters are rationally ignorant. They don't know enough to be good governors. And then they're subject to media, and they're more misinformed than informed, right? Statistically, a coin toss is going to be more accurate than polling the population on a lot of things, just because of the amount of misinformation out there. And then there's the question of, well, who gets to write the proposed legislation that people are going to vote on? And then who gets to interpret the legislation to tell people what the legislation means, which is another layer of manipulation, right? People can misinterpret, misrepresent, and people can vote against something in their best interest because they don't want to go read the actual laws. All these things conspire to say, well, direct democracy doesn't work. And then there's scaling issues, right? How many people can be in any one democracy? And I think this is limited by the biology. If you study Dunbar's number and the number of people you can have in a social group, the number of friends you can actually keep a trust-based relationship on, it's limited biologically. And if we don't design our systems of governance around that, then what's going to happen is that all of society is going to be controlled by a group of people, approximately a couple hundred. Also, the ruling elite is also subject to the biological limits. So they're going to be, Dunbar's number is going to govern the size of the ruling elite. And so you're going to have a couple hundred people ruling billions of people if you're not careful in how you structure society.
There was a great quote. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a great quote the other day by Mr. Pompliano, and he said something to the effect of, if governments want us to be accountable for our blockchain gains, for our crypto gains, then they should be accountable for their campaign promises. And it actually made me think of Eden on EOS for some bizarre reason, because there's baked into the structure of Eden. Another thing that I really like is the fact that, like, you can't really run away with all the money, right? And if you're not accountable to those things that you said that you were going to do, it's baked in within the process to be able to hold the snap election, to be able to pull the person out. It's also baked into the process whereby, like, you can't make any major changes to the structure of the system in your term. You can propose them, but you actually have to wait until the next person comes in. So I think these things are all really important and things that we're missing. I guess my question to you, on a personal note, because I had Chris Barnes on the show last week, and we were talking, and we've met a few times, and so I kind of was chatting with him about this. and for those of you who might not know Chris Barnes, he was basically the winner of the first election. And I mean, it's no secret that there was a little bit of a lull in people who were supporting EOS for a while there. There was a lot of people who were really disgruntled about things that happened. But I personally noticed that, when you resigned and took a little bit of a break and came back with this kind of Eden on EOS model, it really hyped a lot of people up. And it hyped people up in different ways, because for once, they actually felt like they could be heard. And this structure kind of created this almost whole new generation of unknowns and brilliant people like Chris Barnes, who did some really amazing things, right, in the first election, and a community that pretty much, ran itself through these trials. So we were chatting about you a little bit. And so I guess you could have run at any point in time, but this being the first election proper that you're not really sponsoring, we were kind of curious, like, are you going to be present at this first EOS election proper? Can I ask that question?
I'm going to be present for the first round. But I'm not going to go on to throw my hat in the ring for the ultimate position of chief delegate and delegate. So that I really want to empower members of the community, and I'm running a team of developers at Clarianos. We've got funding from the EOS Foundation to continue to build and develop the Eden software. We're looking to move into dispute resolution procedures as the other side of governance, and to hold people accountable to their campaign promises and to community guidelines and all those other subjective things that other blockchains struggle to hold people accountable to. That's the area I'm going to be going. So I'm not going to seek community funding. I'm looking to decentralize and empower the next generation of leaders. So as a representative, I will look at the best candidates that are in final contenders, and I'll cast my vote for the best of the best, but I'm not going to throw my hat in the ring there.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that was essentially my plan the first time that I entered, just because I'm busy doing other things. But it's interesting because, like, you could be in a situation where, like, oh, we're in Dan Larimer's room, let's vote for Dan. And I guess if 3 of them voted for you and you didn't, and it was recorded, you could go on to the next level. But it's interesting because I think, like,
you have to vote for yourself.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, sorry, I didn't realize. So okay, yeah. That's even cooler. But yeah, like I can imagine a situation. It's a little bit different now, but I can imagine a situation like that where, like, some people might do that because it does happen in traditional governance. But, like, if it was me, I'm just gonna put it out there. I mean, if you were just like, hey, I'm Dan Larimer, vote for me, I wouldn't do it. And I think that's the way that you structured this, right? Like, so that, like, people actually had to have an opinion on what to change to like, everyone could vote for you, but I can't see you going very far. I mean, do you think that that's a possibility that people could go through on status? I mean, I guess maybe the fallout for if the very small possibility happened would be the random election, but yeah.
Well, there's always the top group, which is probably 4 to 7 people, is going to be randomly selected from among them. So what you're really doing as a community is putting forward a half dozen equally viable candidates, right? The idea is we don't know which of these people is corrupt. We don't know if one's better than the other, but they're all met a certain threshold, and now we're going to pick from them. So even if the entire community wanted me or wanted several people to be there, you still have a chance of the minority being heard and getting an opportunity. Over time, this is still going to represent the people. And the problem with saying that, well, there's one true person that is the best person for this job, is that's subjective, right? That's appeal to authority. That's arrogant almost. Maybe the minority is right and the majority is wrong, right? So in a country that's like the United States, approximately 50-50, it would just be easier to just say, all right, every other election it goes red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, and be done with it.
I
And
mean,
then just let the parties fight out who
anyway,
their candidate's
right?
going to be.
I read your last article
I mean,
on your blog, and I thought that you brought up a really good point. I want to take some questions from the audience, but I just want to bring this up. You know, it's almost like family. Like, what did they say? Like, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. It's almost worse when it comes to politics, because the state that you're born in, or the region that you're born in, if it's a democracy, it might not be, which is potentially worse. But like, you basically have zero choice, right? And you can't leave, you can't escape, right? Like, you can't get out. And so I think that, like, this approach whereby everyone actually has an equal voice is the way that it needs to be. But if you don't mind, Dan, could we take a couple questions from the audience, because there's a couple of good ones here. How we'll do this one first. What do you expect from the winner of the election? Any ideas on how you see the funds being distributed? I mean, that's a pretty loaded question to me, because like I haven't even heard the politicians' pitches yet. But like, what's your take on that?
That's the beauty of the system, is unless you're in a group with a politician, you don't even have to study their pitches. You don't have to go read all the different things. You just have to show up the day of, hear what's going on. If there's some things that you're interested in, then you can advocate for those things in your group, but you don't have to know what everyone's going to do. There's 150 plus people committed to the election, 300 members in Eden. That's a lot of people to track down. Right. It makes sense for me to be rationally ignorant of all those things. I've got a job of, putting on the election and designing the software and figuring out all that. I don't have time to look at everyone's proposals. I love it when I see initiative like Violet.Garden, which implements a social media network for Eden members. There's lots of those things out there, and I'm as excited as everyone else to actually see what's out there and see what type of people step up so that I can vote for them. I would say that generally speaking, the Eden community's funding is coming from the broader EOS network. And so I would expect the representatives to find a balance between, hey, we got to represent the Eden community's interests and the EOS network's interests and merge them, right? This isn't just all about EOS. This is also about the Eden community and the community growing, and the EOS is subsidizing our community's growth because that benefits EOS. But if Eden can't grow because the funds are not being used in a way that creates more and more incentives for people to join Eden, then it's a virtuous thing. You need to feed both sides, and if you don't feed both sides, then the system won't work. So I'd encourage people that are running to come up with creative ideas. A social media network only available to Eden members is a great way to add additional benefits for being an Eden member. Giving Eden members more votes in your app than non-Eden members is another way to add benefits to being an Eden member. So there's lots of things like that I think should be a part of it. Because as more and more people want to be a member and engage in Eden, the more power Eden has, the more funding that Eden will have, and then ultimately the better for EOS, because the stronger the Eden community, the more legitimate the Eden community, the more legitimate the actions Eden takes for the benefit of EOS. And
we're just at the beginning.
We can start replicating it.
We're just at the beginning too, right? Because as I understood it, the whole system was essentially designed to be like, massive to tiny, right? Like a supermarket could adopt this and use it for, how wages are paid out. It's a really bad example, but like how wages are paid out and benefits are distributed amongst their employees, right? It can be, from something really small to something really massive to the whole United States. So I think that's really interesting. So Ian Jeffries has a question. He's curious about the cap of 10,000 Eden members. And why did you choose 10,000? Why not 1,000 or 100,000? He's wondering, is Dunbar's number involved? And can you elaborate any on why you chose that number?
Sure. Dunbar's number is involved, right? So we know that it can't go to infinity. And the idea is that Eden is supposed to be fractal in nature, which means that if you want to go to like 100 million people, well, then you have a whole bunch of Edens that each have 10,000. They reach consensus. They promote their leaders, and then now you have democracies of democracies on up. So you have that kind of system. So in the United States, there's like 3,000 counties. I think the United States would be much better off if it was a democracy of counties instead of a democracy of people. And each county, if they had approximately 10,000 people per county, I guess that's probably doesn't quite cover the population. It's 30 million. So there's about 100,000 people per county on average in the United States, but some of those bigger counties could probably be divided up to balance it. The idea from the book here is that you don't want unequal parties in a democracy, right? You don't want California and a small Caribbean island having in a democracy together, with California having more votes than that island, and California wouldn't want to give the island equal votes either, right? So you want to make sure that a democracy is of peers. And so that's why 10,000 is about the number of people that would work at a local scale. And from Dunbar's number, it's actually like levels. You can have like so many close friends, so many friends, so many acquaintances, and then like 1 degree of separation. But if you look at Amish communities, they limit themselves in size as well. Nowhere near 10,000. 10,000 would be a really big Amish community. Then they split up and they form other communities. So it's about the size that everyone knows everyone within. You can get direct references to the other members in the community. By the time you get to 100,000, that's a small city, and it's very impersonal, which means that reputation starts breaking down, accountability starts breaking down. The way I'm actually thinking about structuring this is 10,000 is the upper limit, but using the Bancor algorithm to raise the membership fee so that the community can never actually reach 10,000. It gets too costly for people to maintain the membership fees, which forces new communities to spring up with lower membership fees. And that way, if you really want to join a community, you can. You never run out of supply. And the more value a community produces, the more demand there is for the membership, the more funding the community gets from its members, the stronger the community will be. And that's a really good way of judging the legitimacy of a community, right? Because there's a very big difference between a community of 10,000 people, everyone's putting in $1, and a community of 10,000 people where everyone's putting in $1,000, right? It's not just the number of people, but the level of financial commitment toward community ends and the value of what that community is doing. So let me put it to you this way. In an insurance system, everyone pays in money for the insurance premium, and then a couple people benefit when they get struck by lightning and they get the payout. Everyone has incentive to be in there, and even if they're paying hundreds of dollars a month for the insurance, it makes sense to be a member, because the benefit of having group coverage for these large events that you can cover for yourself are so large, right? So there needs to be benefit for being in the community, and the communities that thrive are going to be the ones that justify the largest number of people willing to pay the most because the community is providing that much value. It's not a situation of $1 in and $1 out. 1 + 1 = 3, right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so a group of people come together, they create something that's of more value than their individual contributions. And that extra value then flows back to the members in some form or another, whether it's from a social network or from insurance or from control over governing how EOS allocates its funds. So there's a principle at play here that we all have incentive to work together to produce this value so that we can all be better off. And the communities that are best able to realize that and pick strong leaders will thrive. And that's why I think a 10,000 limit is good, but ultimately there is no limit. It's just grouped for redundancy's sake into groups of 10,000 or less that then come together. And we have to have one succeed before we can divide into two, before we can divide into however many groups we're going to have. And then really start to take things over.
Yeah, I guess if the hive is too heavy because there's too many bees, there's too much honey, it's going to fall and break, and everyone's going to be ticked. So if we break it apart into these smaller systems and then allow people to come together and have like multiple levels of consensus over multiple periods of time, then that gives more people an equal opportunity and voice, rather than these just randomly numbered like 4 years and all this stuff. So Chris Barnes has a question too, which I'm kind of...
Well, the idea...
sorry, go ahead.
Can I say one more thing? The idea is independence. If half of the community wants to go one direction, another half wants to go another, then they should divide into two communities. And if they're already grouped into groups of 10,000, it's like having 50 states. If you don't like what New York's doing, move to Texas, right?
This is great, right? Like, yeah, instead of having a country that's divided between two states, you can have two states that share a country. Red and blue that share the same landform, like flip it on its head and it works beautifully, I think. Chris has a question. I like this as well. He wants to know, how do we... Sorry, wrong question. Right. He wants to know, how do we scale the Eden process to be more than just Eden on EOS? Do you have any thoughts on like how we can do this, right? Like we're at the beginning. This is kind of a test phase, but what's your vision to be able to take this, beyond the EOS community out there into the real world for where it was actually really intended?
Well, phase one is demonstrate that it actually works, right? So it's really, really important that the EOS community demonstrate that we have strong leaders with integrity that follow through on their campaign processes, and that if we were to do a poll of the population, are you satisfied with the outcome, that we would have a greater than 50% approval rating, right? That would be the ideal situation, right? Compared to say the current country where the Congress and the government has like a below 20% approval rating. So if we can get a much higher approval rating, then that would be huge. Once we demonstrate that, we can say, look, it's working here, and you can participate and experience it, for governing social media and for governing allocating of millions of dollars of cryptocurrency. People say, oh, it actually works. Then what I would propose is Eden communities go out there and they go to their local political parties and say, hey, we need to have some local process for picking leaders of our political party, whether it's Democrats, Republican, Libertarian, Constitution, Green, you name it. Say, look, our party has to come to consensus somehow. Let's use this process. In fact, you could even create an entirely new party that's just running on the platform. We're going to use this process to select our leader, and that's who everyone's going to vote for in the general election, right? Because we believe in the process over the party, and the party is the process. And in that way, you've empowered people to reach a new consensus. Because that's the whole goal, is we have to reach a new consensus, which means we have to have the simplest possible thing that we agree on. And that thing that we agree on needs to be the process of reaching consensus versus the outcome, right? We might not agree on climate change or the virus or, the school system or any of the different things that people fight over about, right? Abortion. Take whatever controversial subject. We might not agree on that. But can we at the very least agree that we want a fair process for measuring things and getting corrupt people out? And so there's two types of people out there. Ends justifies the means, and means justifies the ends. I'm advocating that the means justifies the end of the process, because the means is fundamentally legitimate. And if you can get the political parties to do this, you can then take over the existing government, because your party controls it, right? Imagine you've got the Eden Party, and it sweeps the entire government, and all the representatives are held accountable to the Eden community, and they all vote party line because that's what you're supposed to do, vote party line. What is party line? Whatever the consensus bills pass in the Eden Party's governance structure and bylaws. And if people can agree on that very simple process, they can reach that consensus. And as they reach that consensus, now they can take group action to affect change, right? The problem is, how do you coordinate people? How do you organize a strike? How do you organize whatever kind of resistance you're going to have? Well, you need a process to reach consensus that's not just, hey, here's a leader, everybody follow Ron Paul. Then the establishment comes and cuts the head off the leader. All right, how do we pick a new leader? And everyone, strike the shepherd and the sheep scatter. Well, Eden's a process that allows the sheep to promote from within themselves a new shepherd, which makes it a very decentralized, difficult to shut down, difficult to corrupt political movement. And so I think the first step is demonstrate it works on, make sure it works on EOS, and then do things locally. I think every state, every county needs its own chapter of Eden political party. It needs to put its own candidate. And if you do that worldwide, like the Pirate Party, an international political party in favor of this, then all the different local chapters are all coordinating on the best practices and so forth. I think you'd have a very powerful movement where the people can take back their power and reach consensus in a completely non-violent, completely voluntary manner.
In my mind, like, cherry picks things that I like. That's what I do. Sorry, I apologize. But I just want to say this, because Facebook, I know that you're listening. And I just want to say that what I'd really like to see from you, Facebook, is implementing this Eden on EOS system so that we can choose what content is banned and what content is promoted, not you. That's kind of like what I'd like to see, because you're right. You could plug it into a social system. You could plug it into an education system. You could plug it in so that students and teachers and parents together are defining and reforming their curriculum. There's a lot of really big benefits there. So I don't want to keep you too long. Of course, I'm happy to keep you here and talk as long as you want. But I do want to say a couple things before we let you go. So it's funny because I'm where I am today in a very strange way because of you, Dan. And it's interesting because I got into the EOS space early, not as a big investor, just because I liked what you stood for. I liked the way that things were. And I got involved with this community. And we wanted to make the world more accountable, and we were trying to put charity on the blockchain so that it was accountable. And we got in contact with you, and we had an audience with you, and we were going to we spent like a week, day and night, working through this pitch deck, this proposal that we sent to you for funding, and we got it. And then you asked us for $5,000, and we realized that it wasn't you; it was the fake Dan Larimer. It was somebody that was pretending to be you. And luckily, we were smart enough to realize like Block One doesn't need $5,000 to review our proposal. This is crazy, right? But that experience of putting that pitch deck together kind of propelled us to where we are now, to where we are today. And I work for GenerEOS, and GenerEOS, they're really good at, giving back to the community, which is why I love being here. But the other project that I mentioned before, we built a Metaverse, and GenerEOS has a plot in that Metaverse. And if it's okay with you, this Metaverse is kind of structured around gratitudes. And we go in there at the beginning of every show, and we ask people what they're grateful for, and we put it up in the Metaverse. The Metaverse is actually built on EOSIO technology, or EOSIO technology is the backbone that's melded into it. It's actually built on Minecraft. And if you're okay, I'd like to put a gratitude from you up in our GenerEOS plot as a monument to being here with us today. And yeah, if you're okay, would you mind giving us a gratitude today? What are you grateful for, Dan, if it's all right?
Well, I'm grateful for all the people who believe in the vision and who have supported me these past 15 years through Bitshares and Steem and EOS and Eden on EOS. All this would not be possible without the community that has supported these ideas and shares the values of freedom and so forth. So I am super grateful. So I guess you need a short text that's quotable. Yeah, I'm grateful for the true believers in securing life, liberty, property, and justice for all. So that's what I'm here for. And so many people in the crypto space don't care about those things, but those are the people that I think that get what I'm up to and are making it happen. And all of humanity is going to benefit tremendously because of the efforts of each and every community member who hears the ideas and spreads them. It also helps me refine them, right? This has been a learning experience for me because, no one solved these problems before. No one, delegated proof of stake didn't exist. Transactions as proof of stake didn't exist. We didn't have the experiment that was Steemit. So it's been a huge lesson in social dynamics. And that's made possible because of all the people that were willing to put their time and energy into trying something new.
I'm grateful for having this time with the real Dan Larimer, as opposed to the fake one. But yeah, I think it's just, yeah, it's great what you're what you're doing in the world, and dissenters can dissent as they may, but in the end, I think I'd like to hope that everyone is here to make the world a better place. I know at GenerEOS we're constantly trying to figure out a way to utilize your technology through the various places that we venture and we go. And I really hope
at the end of the day, it's not technology, right? At the end of the day, it's the hearts and minds of people that are willing to interact in a voluntary manner with their fellow man.
It's like
people who.
It's like you knew where I was driving.
Really cool.
Driving there. Yeah. So yeah, GenerEOS thanks you for your service a lot, because we wouldn't be here without you, Dan. And I just think everything that you're bringing to the space is really exciting, and that's just awesome in general. And I think it's going to be a really interesting election that comes out of this, the culmination of essentially your life's work up until this point. Do you expect that you'll ever stop? Like, will you ever give up? Like, I kind of see you as the type of person that, like, no matter how perfect something is, you'll always try to better it. You'll always try to engage people more.
Well, I'm already working on ideas for my next book around dispute resolution. I think if we use the molecular animals, true democracy for like creating the laws, how do we judge subjectively and resolve disputes between members when they decide to break the laws, or they, whether it's not a law, maybe it's just a conflict over a contract. All these things need the ability for people to resolve disputes. And if you have a judicial system that is not democratic, basically doesn't reflect the opinion of the people, it can create another power structure that completely undermines democracy, right? It's like the Supreme Court being used to legitimize violations of the Constitution because they're the judge, jury, and executioner of everything that's constitutional or not. That's not representing the people. That's not representing a decentralized interpretation of the Constitution. And so I think dispute resolution is the next leg that needs to be resolved in a decentralized manner that supports true democracy and supports the will of the people, and that doesn't create a ruling class of judges that or district attorneys that are going around there, pressing charges against people without any liability for being wrong. So there needs to be checks and balances in the civil dispute arena. And I think that one of the cool opportunities is that Eden might be a better arbitration forum and process. That anyone with anywhere that has a dispute could come to the Eden community and get it resolved in a fair way. And that's my vision for like the next step in decentralized governance. And that's going to be really relevant when it comes to content on social media platforms. It's going to be really relevant when it comes to holding representatives accountable for their promises, for eliminating fake accounts, or basically it's the immune system of a community. And if you can't get rid of the bad actors, then the bad actors will eventually drive out the good people. So it's a very important process. It needs to go hand in hand with what we've already establishing with the Eden governance process.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important to see how blockchain shapes and forms our society over the next few years. I mean, we're what, 2% of the world now? We used to be 1%. Like and it's going to be implemented on grand scales, and some people might even not realize that it's blockchain. So, and I mean, hats off to what the Claire EOS team. Clary and EOS team has done with, I haven't seen it, but I've heard that you guys have just basically, blockchainified this whole Eden experience from what the preliminary rounds were. So I'm excited about that. I guess my final question to you is, we skipped some questions in the comments, and I'm sorry, people, but I wanted to really focus on, what's pertinent right now. And I think that's the importance of this election that's coming up, because there was a whole book that was written and a whole community that kind of spawned out of it, and new forms of social technology that are essentially making this all possible. And so I kind of wanted to keep on that in that lane, but if I could switch it up a little bit, I want to ask you, because it's somewhat related, right? Yves LaRose and the EOS Foundation now has come out, and they've got this funding mechanism. They're funding people in Eden. What are your thoughts on how, because it's not only them, EOS Starter is out there, they're doing things. There's a few other teams out there that are like throwing money into the community. What are your thoughts on how the community is mobilizing to self-fund, and where we're headed from here, in a sense?
Well, once the community can demonstrate it can govern itself and gets control of things, I see it snowballing as more and more funding can be managed by more and more people in a way that's accountable, and we can really start getting some scale, and you'll see things grow faster and faster, right? It's like an exponential function. It might double in size every single year. Now, pretty soon, it's going to look like nothing's happening, then all of a sudden a whole lot's going to be happening, right? That's what we have going right now, right? We started off with our core group of 30 or so Eden members. Now we're up to 300. Well, it's going to grow to 10,000 even faster, right? Because you have more people involved in inviting more people, and more money is involved, which then more people get to see it work. And all these things start to compound, and as this compounds, it's going to be really, really impressive what it's going to do. And it's going to seem like, why is it taking so long? And then overnight, it's going to blow up in a good way.
I agree. I think it's going to be really exciting times. And I mean, people can say whatever they want about Block One, but they survived the bear market essentially. And in my opinion, it might not be a popular one, but you know, if you are any normal person, preserving value is what you want to do. You want to build that runway. You want to have that airport in place to be able to take off. And I mean, each and every person has to be responsible for themselves. And I think that the fact that you're melding the best way that we can be responsible for ourselves in governance, the principle of governance, to the blockchain, to liberty, is just really special. So, and I want to say this because I think my understanding is, like, you know, somebody's asking about Eden in the Eastern communities. I mean, I think that's a given. I think once, like Dan said, the community learns to self-mobilize, there can be Edens in China, there can be Edens in Japan, there can be Edens in Saudi Arabia, there can be Edens everywhere, right? Yeah.
Right now, we're just proving the concept. We're getting the bugs worked out. We're automating things where possible. You know, it's easier to build one prototype and refine it than try to build 1,000 at the same time. But once we figure out what works, it's going to be really easy to replicate. It's all open source. The book has been translated into a half dozen different languages. So it's a really, the idea is getting out there, and it really is optimized for local groups, and you know, then coming together globally, and democracies and democracies of democracies. So,
well, yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there, Dan. But
I think it's good to have redundancy, right? Like, let me get this clear. I think that we've got the Western block producers and code managers and block producers and wallet providers, and we have the Eastern, or the Chinese and the Koreans. If each of these communities is able to govern itself and receive funding and build independent infrastructure, then no one's dependent on the East or the West or the South, right? There's a lot of redundant roles versus putting everybody under one and having one official wallet and one official source of everything. Redundancy is good. Redundancy is decentralization. And having the Eastern community is going to have different customs than the Western community, and that is good. And they're going to have it's really hard for Westerners to build products for those in the East, and likewise, which is why we want both communities to be operating independently, and then we can collaborate community to community instead of throwing everybody in one big melting pot, and then we have an election and people can't talk to each other because they're different time zones and different languages and completely different cultures.
Now you got me thinking about eating sushi with you in Japan when you come here. But that's a different story. So I gotta let you go, but I do want you to answer Hernan's question, because I think this is a good one as well. So thanks for popping in, Hernan. I know you're a big proponent of Eden, and I think that this is a really good question. How do you propose to follow up and provide transparency with the winners of the EOS election? I believe that is actually baked into the system in a way, but maybe if you could just slightly elaborate on that, Dan.
Every meeting and election is going to be recorded. It's going to be available publicly, so everyone can see everyone's campaign promises, top to bottom. The funds are released monthly, and in doing so, you get an opportunity to see how people are behaving. I think that it would be a reasonable thing to do to fund somebody to audit. You know, Eve proposed this. Have somebody audit and hold people accountable, and then produce reports. You know, shows like this, where you bring on the candidates and you have them talk about what they're doing. You compare it to what they said they'd be doing, and then now we've got the Violet Garden social media for Eden members. There's all these different channels where we can have people organized to hold people accountable. But perhaps the biggest way to hold people accountable is that you've got your representatives. After you vote for them, you're not done. Your role as a community member is to make sure that they're representing you. And then leave feedback. Did this person follow through on what they said they do? Were they faithful to your group? And then all that feedback goes on their profile, just like eBay reviews. And next election, you might look at the reviews of the other people in your group. You say, this person only got 1 star. We're not going to listen to what they have to say. His last group didn't like him, right? So there's systems like this that we can build in place. But you're unlike today, when you vote for a politician, they do what they're going to do or not, and you really can't hold them accountable because A, you never talk to them, and B, there's just too many people who everyone gets an opinion on whether or not they lived up to their promise. There's just too many opinions. But with Eden and the fractal structure, the number of people that are able to leave a review for someone is relatively small, and they're the only opinions that matter because they're only representing a relatively small group of randomly selected people from the community at each level. So I think that it's I guess a much easier system for holding people accountable. And so you're responsible for how you vote in your group, and then you're responsible for leaving a review later on so that subsequent elections can be better informed as a result of your contribution, both your vote and your review.
I can see the headlines for CNBC now. Eden on EOS, eBay reviewifying your candidates till the end. That's good. I like it. Yeah. I really thank you so much for coming and joining us here on the GenPool Spotlight. I really hope to share the stage with you again at some time. I kind of hope it's not this weekend. I'd rather not be in the same room as you, to be honest, because I'm not planning on going through the first round either. And I want to see all of these people's ideas materialize in the later rounds. So forgive me, it's nothing against you. It's just I want to see the process work at its best. But please come back here or come back and entertain us at some point in time, because I really enjoyed this. I mean, as a permaculturalist, philosopher, blockchain enthusiast, professor of history and politics and economics, just the insights were really valuable. And I would love to have those come out like in real time, as opposed to like a textbook that's old and dusty off the shelf that doesn't really work. A person like yourself who tends to look at what's in front of him and build things that are giving yourself permission to fail in a sense, and readapting and melding and aiming towards this perfection with all of your blockchain innovation melded with your ways to put that into important places in the world where people will actually use it and not necessarily be completely obsessed with price, but rather the value that it brings to society in general. I think it's just a really great service. So thank you, Dan.
We need to focus on producing value, not speculating and hoping that other people buy our token from us for more than we paid for it. That's not adding value. A community comes together to produce value together, and that's the mindset that will ultimately, that's the value investing versus speculative big payday or following the money. Slow and steady wins the race. And I think that we're going to discover that all these other blockchain projects out there, if they don't have decentralized governance, are going to put us in a more centralized world than we have today, with insiders controlling the system top to bottom, whether they're miners or block producers or Coinbases or whatever the case may be. As those systems mature, they're going to mature to centralization and even tighter control and lock-in than we have today. So I think that those of us who are here for the original mission of freedom, independence, that's what I'm after, and I think that that's what Eden communities are going to achieve. And if we don't completely achieve it, well, we will learn things and we'll be even closer to achieving it, and we can adapt. So I think there's no better time in history for this, by the way. I'm convinced the existing system is going to fall around us. We don't have to do anything. It's just unsustainably fragile and bankrupt. So this is a perfect time when people are going to be looking for new solutions and be open to trying new things, because in the past, no one wants to try something new, because why do something new if you don't have to? The existing system, quote, works. But I think that we're going to see that the existing system is failing, and more people are seeing that it's failing. And that's a huge opportunity for something like Eden to rise from the ashes. So get the word out there, and thank you everyone for participating.
You heard it here first. Go to the construction store, get yourself a helmet, because the walls of Jericho are coming down.